Everybody excited? Yeah. Are we ready to roll, Dr. Watson? All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Isn't this exciting? Simone is here at Trinity, at our very Trinity. Look at everybody, so happy to see you. Thank you for coming. I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Jamal Watson. Isn't he the best? Thank you, Dr. Watson. I want to thank some of our other faculty who I know are here tonight. I see Dr. Cynthia Greer here with all of our counseling students. And I see Dr. Josh Wright up there. And I know our alum and faculty member Lauren Wells was here. Is Lauren? There you are. Thank you. And Sister Ann Howard, Director of Campus Ministry. And one other person, I'm just going to do a commercial announcement. I'm sorry if I missed others. But Chaz, will you raise your hand, please? So Chaz, most of you don't know yet, but you will know him because he is building a newsroom in the basement of Main Hall. That's going to be fabulous. It's going to be a space for student media, newspaper, podcasting, social media, the whole 9 yards with all stuff. And it's supported by a special grant from the Davis Foundation. And I know that Barbara Golladay, where's Barbara Golladay, our fundraiser extraordinaire? Barbara's here somewhere, and she did all the fundraising for it. So next semester, we will open the newsroom. And we want all of our students to be involved in this. And we want our students to be involved, Simone, because this is a campus that cares deeply and passionately about the world today, about the role of women and men in the world, about the role of African American and Latina and Asian and people of all races and backgrounds. We care deeply about social justice, right? Isn't that one of our mainstays? And we're very involved in the political whirl that you report on and observe every day. We're so proud to know you. We're all very proud of Vice President Harris and a little jealous that you got to work with her. We want to hear about that. And I know that following this, there will be many students and faculty who want to chat with you, get selfies, and I hear already that you've agreed to stay for a few minutes afterwards. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Jamal Watson may do the formal introduction, and then Simone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President McGuire, for your leadership and for being here this evening. I would ask before I do the introduction if we have cell phones, if we can silence our phones. We want to certainly hear from Simone and look forward to engaging with her in the Q&A. Symone Sanders-Townsend is an author, seasoned Democratic strategist, and how many of you watch her on MSNBC? All right. She rose to prominence in 2016 as the National Press Secretary for U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders' then presidential campaign. At 25, she became the youngest presidential press secretary on record and was named to Rolling Stone magazine's list of 16 young Americans shaping the 2016 election. At 29, she published her first book, No, You Shut Up, Speaking Truth to Power and Reclaiming America, and she served as a senior advisor for President Joe Biden's 2020 presidential campaign. At 31, Simone was appointed as a senior member of the Biden-Harris administration, serving as deputy assistant to the president and senior advisor-in-chief spokesperson to Vice President Kamala Harris. Now at 32, just 32, right? Now at 32, Simone's namesake show provides essential context on the most pressing issues facing Americans today. And we're so very, very happy to have her here. A couple of years ago, I organized a symposium at Columbia University that examined the life of Reverend Al Sharpton, and I knew I had to have Simone as a panelist, and I came and she tore the house down. It was very, very good. So we are so happy to have her here. Please join me in welcoming our friend, Symone Sanders-Townsend.
Thank you, Dr. Dr. Watson. Thank you, President McGuire. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm going to talk for a little off top, and then I want to make sure I reserve the bulk of our time for Q&A, because I'm all about conversation. I was telling Dr. Watson as we walked in here that I'm a recovering professional fellow. So in between my political life, prior to my TV life, I was a fellow. And so I was a fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics at the Kennedy Center. I was also a fellow at USC, their Center for the Political Future. And each time I was a fellow, I taught a class. At Harvard, I taught a study group. You know, y'all could show up if you wanted to show up, didn't have to. I had a situation, but it wasn't as formal. At USC, it was like this. People signed up for my class. I had to grade. I had 2 hours. So I feel like I am back in my professor mode today. So I'm happy to be here. For those of y'all that don't know my background or my story, I think it's important to ground you in that, because my background and where I come from and my experience is what really guides me through the work that I have done in my professional political career, and it guides me in the work that I'm now doing in my professional media career. I'm from a place called North Omaha, Nebraska, in the middle of the map, as I was telling some of the young ladies back there, myself and Malcolm X. I know Detroit likes to claim him, but he is from North Omaha. And North Omaha is I like to say, a microcosm of many urban cities across the country. It is quite segregated, right? You got North Omaha, you're predominantly African-American part of the city. South Omaha, you're predominantly Latino and Hispanic part of the city. And then West Omaha, or the suburbs out west, is how we like to say, is everybody else. And my mother is a native Nebraskan. My father was from Mount Bayou, Mississippi. He was in the military. That's how he got to North Omaha, Nebraska. And in the community that I grew up in, we were not a political family. I like to joke that up until my father's passing, I think he was a closeted Republican, okay? We'll learn more about that later. But we were not a political family. But my mother was very involved in the community. And so growing up, I knew the city council folks, the state legislative folks. In Nebraska, there's a unicameral, so everybody's a state senator. Only unicameral in the country. I knew the people who were the mayor. I knew the church that we went to in North Omaha. Everybody went to that church. And so the teachers, the janitor, the black executives at the companies, the political people, you could find them all in one pew on a Sunday morning. And that is the community of which I grew up in and that I was formed. And that is where I got my start in both politics and media. It was through a program at Girls Incorporated where I first learned about media literacy. So to hear that you all are going to have a newsroom in this building, I think is so key and critical. It's a resource that not every student across the country has. And it was my experience with media literacy and my experience with the program at Girls Incorporated called She Votes that got me engaged and involved in the political process and the media process of it. So it was in our media literacy program where I wrote and edited and directed my first PSA, and we won a national award. It's where I figured out that the people behind the camera, the people that write the words, those are the people with the power. And so growing up, I either wanted to be a judge or chef. Because judges, in my opinion, had the ability to hold people's lives in their hands. The politicians are important, the people are important, but the judges can make a decision whether someone gets to go to drug court or rehabilitative services or they go to jail. Mm-hmm. And that want really got me engaged and involved in juvenile justice work. So for the longest time, up until I served for Senator Bernie Sanders' campaign, I was a juvenile justice advocate. I'm the former chair of the National Coalition for Juvenile Justice Emerging Leaders Committee, where we work to bring young voices to the policy conversations happening in juvenile justice reform. And I got all my start in all of that in North Omaha, Nebraska. And I wanted to be a judge up until I got to college, and then I had to take some classes, and I was like, I don't know about this. And I had an internship at a law firm, and I was like, well, I need windows, and I want to talk to people. I don't think this is for me. But I had a number of internships, a number of experiences, and I kept coming back to communications and then separately politics. And the reason I went into political communications is because I will watch TV, because I guess that's what, nerdy 16-year-olds did. I'd watch the news, and I would wonder, why are they saying it like that? And I would look at the campaigns and the ads and the things on TV, and it would strike me that they were not speaking to me. Young people, as a young black woman, as young bald black women from the Midwest, right? Why? Why is it like this? And when I got engaged in political work, it's when I realized that the politicians are important, but it's the people behind the politicians that are critical. Because politics and campaigns, and frankly, even what you see on the news every day, is nothing but a bunch of people who got in a room, sat around a table, and decided this is the message that we want. That's what happens in a campaign. A bunch of people get in a room at the table, they decide this is what we want to convey, and then they build a strategy around that. What fundraising strategy supports what we want to convey? What organizing strategy supports what we're trying to convey? And part of that organizing strategy, how can we get people to vote for us based on what we want to convey? That's all it is. A message that a bunch of random people in a room decide this is what it is, and then they adhere to the message. Sometimes they feel like the message doesn't work, so they tweak it. But almost all the time, I found that the people sitting at that table did not look like me. They were not representative of young people. They were not representative of people of color, of women of color. They largely didn't know anybody that didn't live in a non-major city. I like to tell people I'm from a city town. So that is why I wanted to do political communications, and I wanted to get involved in politics because for me, everything is political. I don't care what the people tell you, they're lying. Every single thing is political. The ability to go to the grocery store and get green lettuce in your neighborhood is a political decision. It is political. The ability to go to the doctor when you do not feel well and get the medication that you need in a timely manner, that you're not making a decision whether you're getting the medication or you can pay your bills, is political. It's all political. So when people say that they don't do politics or, we're not really getting political here, okay. What the politics is happening whether you engage with it or not. Okay, so the only way we change the system that I will contend it was not built for the majority of people in this room is to get involved in the system. So that's what I did. And it wasn't until I was interning for my then mayor. It was my first day of the internship, and they announced that they were going to recall the mayor. And if you know anything about a recall election, you have to have 2 elections. First, an election to decide if the people really want the person or the entity to be recalled. They have to vote yes or no. If people overwhelmingly vote yes, then there is an election to decide if that particular person is actually going to be recalled. It's very expensive. Cities and municipalities don't like it because the entity that is being recalled is the person that incurs the cost. In this case, the mayor's office. So I went to go volunteer on the mayor's effort to beat the recall. Now the mayor, he beat the recall effort, but the writing's on the wall if they're trying to recall you. He lost re-election 2 years later. But it was in that campaign that I volunteered for where I met 2 young consultants who own their own political firm out of Tennessee. They were 2 young Black consultants, and the mayor's team had hired them to come and turn out, organize, get the people to vote in North and South Omaha respectively. Remember, the predominantly African-American and Latino Hispanic parts of the city. So I did whatever they needed. My mother, again, was very involved in the community, so I could find space where they needed to meet. If they, I knew the politicians and the people, so people they needed to talk to. And it was through that experience that they continued to let me work with them throughout the time that I was in school. And that's where I got the bulk of my political experience. In Nebraska, judges are appointed, they are not elected. It did not dawn on me that in places across the country, judges are elected. But working with these 2 young men in their firm, I worked on judges races in Tennessee, judges races in North Carolina. I did work on reservations. I worked on state legislative races all across the country. I went with them to do candidate analysis where they sit in a room and they tell the candidate about this poll that they put out in the research, and they give a SWOT analysis and let them know if they really think that they should be running for office or not. And that is when I knew that this is what I wanted to do. So I worked a governor's race once I graduated. I worked a couple different places, but the place that I ended up landing was I worked a governor's race. I was a deputy communications director for a governor's race in 2014 in Nebraska. In 2014, you couldn't say healthcare or Obama. And I was working in one of the reddest places in America, so you can imagine that was fun. And after that, I decided that I needed to move to D.C. because I wanted to do politics, and I wasn't going to hit it big in politics in Omaha, Nebraska. It just wasn't going to work for me. So I moved. I worked for a consumer advocacy think tank. It was the hardest thing I ever did. I did not enjoy it. I worked on, it was progressive trade policy. I knew nothing about trade policy. But Maxine Waters said she wasn't going to hire me because I didn't have any technical writing experience when I went to interview with her. So what's more technical than international trade policy? So I did all that. Then I ended up working for Senator Bernie Sanders, and I think you all know the rest. And I guess I have to say throughout my entire career in politics and now my career in media, the thing that I thought to be true all those years ago when I was a college student, I know to be literally the Bible now, is in fact that the people sitting around these tables who are deciding what the message is. On my show every week, you know how we decide what we're covering? We get on a call and I tell the people what I care about. And then they tell me what the network cares about. And then we fight. And then we come to a consensus about we could do 78% of the things that I care about. And then I got to do that Trump story. You know, you can't win them all, folks. You can't win them all. But you are literally deciding. The news, people are deciding what angle they want to cover on the story, how they want to present it, the words that they use to talk about it. And you know, you all are what I like to call, you're very close to political professionals. You're keyed in, you're paying attention, but the majority of people in America are not. The majority of people in America do not know the difference of what I do now and what I used to do when I was a commentator on CNN. To them, I'm a reporter. But when you are a commentator, a political analyst, whatever, I had never signed a contract before up until now that it was in the contract that I had to tell the truth. Okay? No one, when I was a commentator, was calling me up and asking me to fact check. I wasn't going through standards with what I had to say. It was me and a bunch of people getting up there saying what we want to say on TV. And a number of us cared about keeping the bar high and substantive. But there were some people that did not. To this day, there are people that do not. And what I believe is that media literacy is a class that should be taught on every single college campus in America. Because people do not understand the nuances and the difference between a paid political analyst who's paid to give their opinion and traditional journalists and correspondents and people who have to adhere to news standards. And it is dangerous because people are taking what they hear on television, what they read on the internet, and then they are repeating it in their everyday spaces and places in their community and their circles. We are literally self-selecting what we choose to engage with, and what we think we know, we are reinforcing only what we think we know in most instances. And if we're honest, far too many of us don't really know too much. So that has brought us to the place that we are now in when we talk about media consumption and the media apparatus in America. And I felt it was very important when I made the decision that I was ready to leave the White House, which was the opportunity of a lifetime. Every time I go back to the White House, I'm just like, I can't believe I used to work here. But when I left, I had to make a decision about what it is I wanted to do. I had corporate opportunities. I had other, I keep telling my husband, I'm trying to live the soft life. He said, you don't live the soft life. You go to work every weekend. And I said, the girls on Instagram is living a soft life. That's what I'm trying to live now. Come on now. I see the girls posting it on the TikTok. But what was important to me is throughout my entire career, I have been a part of the media apparatus conversation. But when I come on as a guest or as a spokesperson, I'm not facilitating the conversation. I am merely joining in a conversation that, again, as I just told you, someone else decided the conversation we're going to have. And in hosting my show, I get to dictate what the conversation is. The news is what I say it is. And I find that a very powerful position to be in, particularly in this day and age. So that's my quick primer before our general conversation. So let's open it up.
We have a microphone, and I know that there are questions there, so let's have a dialogue. So if you have a question, please stand and go to the microphone, and Simone will answer your question. Who's going to go first? Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. Gotta get all the way over to the other side.
Okay, my question is, was it like weird, or not weird, but like what was the transition from like working for Bernie Sanders to Kamala Harris?
So there was a chasm, if you will, of individuals. There were a number of steps that I took from working for Senator Sanders and working for the vice president. After I worked for Senator Sanders, I was a political commentator. It was in that time at CNN. It was in that time that's when I was a professional fellow Okay, I was going around the country. I did a lot of speaking engagements. I also had my own consulting firm. So I was consulting for gubernatorial candidates. I did a number of state legislative races, some Senate races. And it was after I did my USC fellowship in 2019, I went to go work for President Biden's presidential campaign after a conversation with him. And then when Vice President Harris, then Senator Harris, was picked as a member of the ticket, I ended up traveling with both her and President Biden. And I was just like, it was to the point where one day I would be driving to Delaware, because if you remember, we were in the middle of a pandemic. And at that time, President Biden, he was operating, we had campaign headquarters in Philadelphia, but nobody was there. But when, we felt comfortable, it was time to travel, we could travel again, we were flying out of Delaware. So I would drive from DC to Delaware, get on the plane, travel all day with him, land late at night, drive back at like 1 a.m. to DC to get on the plane with Vice President Harris, then Senator Harris at 7 a.m. the next day. So I was just like, look, I ain't doing this. One of y'all get this week, one of y'all get the other week. I ain't doing this. And I was very, fortunate to, when we finally won, the Vice President asked me to serve on her team on the re-elect, and then asked me to serve as her spokesperson in the White House. But I got a lot of questions when I went to go work for Vice President Biden, because people were like, how could you? The progressives were like, she's betrayed her people. And the staunch, Democrats who didn't understand why I went to go work for Bernie Sanders in the first place were like, who is she? And I'm like, y'all know who I am. And I just didn't understand, because, old white men go work for whoever they want all day long, and it's literally not a news story. But I made a decision, a work decision. Politics is what I did as a living. This is how I paid my bills. Okay, and so I made a professional career decision about where I wanted to work, and so many people had questions. And I literally could do nothing on the campaign for like the first month without everybody asking the same question. So I ended up doing this Q&A with one of the reporters, the political reporters at Glamour. I know really well. I knew her from when I worked for Bernie Sanders. And I called her up and I said, I want to tell you why I'm going to work for Joe Biden, because I'm tired of answering these questions. And the next time somebody asks me, I'm going to tell them to read the Glamour article. And that's exactly what I did. And in the story, I talked about the fact that my values are not tied to Bernie Sanders. They're not tied to Joe Biden. They're not tied to, now they're not tied to Kamala Harris. My values are tied to me. And I think that for a whole swath of young people, and even some not so young people, their political ideology is tied to a person. Whether it is President Obama, or for some of my Republican friends, Ronald Reagan, or even now Donald Trump, right? Hillary Clinton, right? People's political ideology, what they believe, what they think they know. There are a lot of people whose political ideology is tied to Bernie Sanders. That's not me. And I think that more people need to anchor their political ideology to their values, because people will disappoint you. Politicians are human. They are just regular people who got in the room. As I told you about that table. And so I made my decisions about where I work and what I do and whom I work for based upon my values and what I'd like to accomplish at that time. And I think that was like a revolutionary concept for people to believe that like a young Black woman could do that. But I think it's something that as young people across the board, especially young people of color, especially young women, need to do. Because if I waited my entire career for somebody to give me permission to do what I'm doing, I would not be standing here talking to you right now, and I would not have a television show on MSNBC. It just wouldn't happen. They're not knocking down the door to hire people that look like me. There are people that, the agents I first spoke to told me that I needed voice lessons because I did not sound like what people were used to hearing when they turned on the television. This was like 5 years ago. I was like, oh, okay. Oh, okay. Somebody else was like, I just think the look is a little aggressive. I was like, okay, all right. Someone else told me I wasn't palatable enough for cable television. I'm still trying to figure out what she meant. I didn't know if I was too bald, too black, or too loud. I still do not know. But the idea of whether we are talking about a political spokesperson or a news anchor looks like, I did not fit that bill. So it is my hope that, people see me living the way I talk to you all is how I used to talk to Joe Biden, it's how I used to talk to Kamala Harris, it's how I talk to my team, it's how I talk on TV if you watch my show. Be like, oh my goodness. And I just think that, again, understanding what your values are is very important. It was obviously different working from Senator Sanders and Joe Biden to Kamala Harris. I would note that I told the vice president this. I said, you are the first Black woman I have ever worked for and probably the last. And she laughed. And it is because the way in which I'd worked over 27 different campaigns before I worked for her. If I think about it, I had largely always, with maybe 2 exceptions, worked for men. The questions I got about the vice president, or when she was a senator and we were on the campaign trail, were just starkly different than any of the other questions I ever got about anybody else I ever worked for. And I used to call it the unicorn in the glass box syndrome. Because for many people out there, the Vice President Harris is a unicorn in the glass box. Nobody's ever seen anybody that like her, like, oh my goodness, she was a DA, then an AG, then all of a sudden she's a senator, and all of a sudden she's running for president, and now she's the vice president of the United States of America. How did this happen? And I regularly had to ask the reporters, of which I now many of them work with, say, would you ask these questions? Would you ask these same questions about Joe Biden? Exactly. And if you would not, perhaps there's a little bias somewhere sprinkled in there, maybe just a touch, I don't know.
Questions? Yeah, you can just stand up and ask Mary. Or you can just ask from there if you want.
Okay. Hi, my name is Miriam Babsanas, and I'm a 4th-year student. My major is in journalism and media studies with a minor in Africana studies. And I think you mentioned a really important point on people grounding themselves in their values over politicians. And I think the media, at the end of the day, is a business that sells. And unfortunately, people are attracted to scandal, and that's why people are attracted to politicians over political issues or actual values. And so, as a future journalist, what do you think is a cultural shift that needs to happen for people to be more interested about values rather than people and scandal and what sells?
I'm also, I like to describe myself as a pragmatic progressive, so I'm about to give you a pragmatic progressive answer. I actually don't think that a cultural shift will come about that will make the entirety of the American population all of a sudden care about substantive issues. When I used to work on trade policy, I was calling up all the networks and the papers trying to get my boss on television, and regularly the bookers would tell me, oh, trade is not sexy. Okay, but we're in the middle of negotiating a free trade agreement that out of there are 100 chapters, 99, only one of them have to do with trade. The other 99 have to do with all these other things. And they're like, yes, not sexy. Poverty is not sexy. Trade agreements, not sexy. Come back when there's something with crime. What is that? So I think that if we are waiting on the American people, on the electorate to wake up and shift, we'll be waiting for a very long time. I think what matters is solid, good coverage. And so if there is an issue, I think more journalists need to be willing to walk down a story, whatever the story is, and not get distracted by the shiny object. Like, in my opinion, the Herschel Walker abortion story, shiny, distracting object. We really do not care. Yeah. Like, initially, yeah, hypocrite, got it. We got the hypocrite. What else? Is there more here? We have that he's a hypocrite. Tell me more. Tell me how many people who have interviewed Herschel Walker have asked him about his stance on the economy, or what bills he would support, or because if the people in Georgia are telling you that they care about their economic issues and overarching that the abortion issue is not a motivating issue for Republicans in the state, would it not be a better use of your time to, yes, ask the Herschel Walker abortion question, then ask 3 other questions to get to these other issues? But there is a lack of due diligence in a lot of spaces and places. There is also, I believe, there are some things that some people just don't believe is a story. And I think that goes back to the gatekeepers. And I think the good thing about our the media apparatus is that the gatekeepers are changing across the industry. And so there's a whole climate beat now. 5 years ago, there wasn't a climate beat. There wasn't. 5 years ago, we were still in the midst of climate crisis. There was no climate beat. There is there are all of these different beats and lanes that are opening up because people are realizing, I mean, race reporters, should be very clear, prior to President Obama, most people did not have a black reporter on their White House staff. There was not black, there weren't black, it was April Ryan. And like 3 other maybe. They did not have, there was not a race beat. Could you believe it? Remember, when President Obama got elected, people were like, we're in a post-racial America. What was that? I'm still waiting on the post-racial reckoning. So I think that it is the industry and the apparatus itself that is changing. There's not going to be a cultural shift for the American electorate that will wake them up and decide that for them to eventually care about these issues. But now, because there is a climate crisis beat, there are climate-centered stories about the crisis that is happening that people are reading, and it is moving them to maybe care about something that they did not care about before because they read about it or they saw it on television.
Questions? Yes.
My name is Carol Cruz, and I graduated in 2017. My question to you is, despite your education experience and accomplishments, explain to me a little bit about when you had moments of self-doubt and personal incompetence. How did you overcome that?
I think that's a good question. Maybe I've never personally felt incompetent. But definitely self-doubt. I mean, I had self-doubt every day. I had self-doubt when I decided to take this job. But I think that when I went to go work for Senator Sanders, when they announced that I worked there, there were 10 people that knew. 7 before the announcement, like I walked on the stage. 7 of them were backstage with us before it happened, because that is where everyone said, oh, we should just tell everyone you work here today. And I would like to remind you all that that was a day that earlier in that day, 2 young black activists interrupted Senator Sanders at a Medicaid event in Seattle. And I was on a plane coming there to introduce him, not as a staff person, but in my juvenile justice capacity. And backstage, everybody's like, oh, we think we should tell everybody you work here today. I was like, I don't think so. But obviously, that's what we ended up doing. So I had to make a decision in that moment, like, oh, I said, well, what are we telling people? That I'm the National Press Secretary? They're like, yeah, whatever you want. Yes, this is what we discussed. One of the people who did not know was the communications director for whom I was working. So you can imagine that set up a very interesting dynamic for me in the workplace. And I had a number of staff people whom I worked with on that campaign to tell me that I was only there because I was black, to my face. I had a communications director that for the last 4 months I worked on the campaign, 4 or 5 months, he just did not speak to me. We would be on the plane and I'd ask a question and he would write back in the email, you need to direct all questions to so-and-so. You know, I had, literally, I would walk into rooms and I would go to events with the senator within the first month and a half, and I would go to the place where they told me the staff was going and I would not be able to get in until some people had to come down to validate that I was who I said I was. I was, 8 months into the campaign with him, where literally in Massachusetts, walking into a building, I'm 2 steps behind, 2 steps in front of Senator Sanders, and our whole staff, it's like 8 of us, senior staff, walking into a building, and a state trooper comes up and literally yanks me out of the entourage. Only for someone else, who was not any of the older men that I worked for, someone else had to grab me the other arm and say, hey, she works here. So yes, I have and that's just that one job. So I have regularly experienced the people telling me I have not earned, because that's essentially what they're saying. When someone tells you that you're only here because you're a woman, you're only here because you're a person of color, you're only here because insert whatever you want to insert, they are asserting that you have not earned what you have. And so I've regularly experienced people alluding that I have not earned what I know that I have worked for. And then I've also, in many respects in my life, questioned if I am where I am, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, because I didn't go to the schools that other people in this room went to, or I don't know the people that so-and-so know, or I have not done this before. But Donna Brazile I called her up one time, very distraught, and she let me speak, and then she says, well, perhaps this is not the job for you. And I'm very, those are my eyebrows, Madam President. I was like, oh. I got very buttoned up. I was like, oh. And then I hung up, and then I called back. And then me and Donna had a conversation, and what she was saying was, it does not get any easier from here. So if you can't handle the ageism, if you can't handle the sexism, if you can't handle the racism, perhaps this is not the job for you. We have to work to combat those things. We have to fight them. But what we don't talk enough about is that we also have to navigate through them. Because if you don't navigate through it, there's no opening the door behind you for other people to walk through. Okay, and the isms are something we will have to navigate through for the foreseeable future. This is something that is not going away tomorrow. Whether you're on a campaign, whether you're in the newsroom, whether you're in the boardroom, whether you're in a corporate environment, literally in education, everywhere the isms exist. And navigating through them is a key piece. And so I figured out how to navigate through the isms. And some days I got close to 100%, other days I didn't. But I had to learn very quickly that I deserve to be where I am. And so nowadays I don't question if I deserve to be here. Right? Like now everybody wants to ask me about like, oh, well, how can you host a show and be a journalist if you used to work for a president or a vice president? And I'm like, oh, have y'all never met George Stephanopoulos? I'm just confused why you're asking me these questions. Why are you talking to me like this? I just don't understand. So, or insert any other, again, older white man that has worked in politics, left, made money, or had a show or a podcast, or insert whatever little thing we're doing today. Why are you asking me these questions? So now I'm just like a little defiant about it all. But I think that is something that young people of color, young women, people really need to understand that the isms are not going anywhere. And we do not talk enough about the need to navigate through the isms. And that doesn't mean that we don't have the meeting to address it. That doesn't mean we let it slide, right? You have to have your personal and professional line. Okay, if you don't get one, far too many people, when they have issues in their careers, it's because they have not identified their personal nor professional line and what they would do when and if someone walks right up to it, or dare I say cross it. And people are crossing people's personal and professional lines, and then they find themselves doing things that they never would have said yes to, saying things they never would have done, working in situations they never would have worked in. But because they didn't know how to say no, they didn't know how to get about it. I'm very good at being like, this is not the place for me. I'm going to go. Done it many times. So I think that is something that I really wish someone had told me earlier. But every chance I get, I tell it to other people because it is a necessity, I think.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, how are you? My name's Kiana. I'm in a clinical mental health counseling program, and I'm in Dr. Greer's class. It's career and lifestyle development. So one of the things that we focus on is career counseling. So I'm curious, in high school, did you have a career counselor? And if so, what was that experience like? And if you didn't, how did you feel about not having it?
I didn't have a career counselor in high school. I went to a Catholic all-girls high school. I'm not Catholic, but in Nebraska, the better schools are Catholic schools. So I went to Catholic school my entire life, and my college was a Catholic Jesuit college. So I'm all about the social justice. Okay, all about that, okay? But I didn't have a career counselor, and I wished I did. I did not have anyone talking to me about what it is that I could do, right? They talked to me about what schools I could go to, but not what it is that I could do. I talked about the community that I came from, but my world was quite small. Like it wasn't until I had never left the country until my senior year of college. And so I do think that the career counseling piece and the expanding the horizons of young people, especially in those formative years, is actually very important because you don't know what is possible. Because as I noted, we only know what we think we know.
Yes.
I hear you say about navigating. I hear you say about maneuvering and isms and maneuvering. How long do you think? How much more time do you think we have to maneuver?
We will be maneuvering until.
Right. Also, it seems to me that Democratic or the Democratic Party is synonymous with African Americans. And you said earlier about you having your political views being close to your values. So if we're navigating on our values, which come from our culture, which is about our country and the whole United States, what would be? Then there would be no political parties in my mind because everyone would be voting for a person that is close to their values, whether they were a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. But it seems as though that there's a propensity to direct certain groups of individuals toward a certain group or category or party. And is that beneficial for us?
So there's a lot there. We're going to unpack it all. So first, how long are we going to maneuver? Well, we cannot even have honest conversations about the origins of our country. Okay? So until we can have an honest conversation that literally a war was fought because people wanted took up arms against the government because they wanted to retain the right to own people that look like me because it benefited them economically. That's what it was about. Yes, it was about the economy of slavery.
Right.
That was it. So until we can all agree there, we're gonna be maneuvering for a very long time. Now, this other piece. So let me just break this down for you all. So I believe that there is a possibility for additional political parties within the system of the United States of America. The problem is that people talk about the viability of those parties when we get to a presidential cycle. And the way a third, fourth, or fifth, right, the way that a Green Party, because it does exist, becomes viable is that they register as a political organization. And then they run candidates under the umbrella of that organization at the local level. They have an apparatus of which to fundraise into, and then it is literally grassroots up, so that when a presidential does come around, you have a viable party that has a proven record of running candidates, winning, and an economic apparatus of which to fundraise into. That piece is important because, unfortunately, we can say we don't like it. We can debate if it is the best thing ethically, right? But let's talk about the reality. The reality is that the economics of our politics flows through two political parties. And this is personally why I do not think we will ever see any major campaign finance reform, because it would cripple the apparatus that is the Republican Party apparatus or the Democratic Party apparatus. Because true campaign finance reform means, what's your name? Rashina. Means Rashina can run for mayor she can run for county exec in PG County under no umbrella, raise $6,000 and win. You can't raise $6,000 and win a race in America today. It don't work like that. Not a mayor's race. Where I'm from in Omaha, Nebraska, I used to want to run for city council before I moved to DC. To run for city council with no name recognition in Omaha, Nebraska in 2014, I would have needed $100,000 at least. I have to at least be able to raise $100,000. With name recognition, $65K. You can't at least raise $65K with name recognition. Do not think about putting your name on the ballot. That's crazy. But campaign finance reform. So the funding piece I talked about is very important. There are no other parties that have demonstrated the political prowess and the funding mechanism that the Democratic Party apparatus and the Republican Party apparatus has. Until that happens, we will not have a third party. That being said, because the funding and the power flows through these two apparatuses, it is, and in most places, save a couple places in America, you could run, there's no, they don't run campaigns under Democrats or Republicans. People just run as candidates. A couple places in America that does happen. That is not the way in which our politics at large is structured, though. And so that's why Bernie Sanders, who's a true independent, ran as a Democrat in the presidential election in 2016. Because anything else, he wouldn't have been viable. It's not right. But that is what it is. And so I do think that when you look at the two apparatuses, the Republican Party apparatus and Democratic Party apparatus, think of the apparatus as the nucleus. The nucleus is made up of your candidates, your donors, your party committees. When people say Democratic Party, what they're really talking about is the Democratic Party apparatus. That is the DNC, the DCCC, the DSCC, the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, the committee that elects governors. Like, I could go down the line. Same thing on the Republican side. The nucleus, or the apparatus, is powered by the factions. If you look at my Republican friends, there used to be, everybody just used to be a conservative. And then I would say maybe you used to have two factions. You had conservative Republicans and you had your more moderate Republicans, right? The factions have grown over the years. The Tea Party is now a faction of the Republican Party apparatus. It used to be an apparatus adjacent movement. Apparatus adjacent meaning that it was not under the umbrella of, but often aligned with or sometimes worked against the apparatus. The Tea Party was that until they became a faction of the Republican Party. The Trump Republicans, Trump people, were an apparatus adjacent movement that became a faction of the Republican Party. Heck, QAnon used to be an apparatus adjacent movement. Now is a faction of the Republican Party. And if you don't think I'm telling the truth, look at the confirmation of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Yep. They were bringing up the pedophile thing because that is a key tenet of what QAnon people believe. Those are just facts. On the Democratic side, so I could say maybe now we could name maybe like 6 or 7 factions on the Republican Party apparatus. On the Democratic side of the aisle, Democratic Party apparatus, we could sit here and we could really name 100 factions. And therein lies the challenge or the opportunity. And that's the way the ball bounces. So I just think that there is, when we used to, not since I've been, of voting age. The first time I could vote was in 2008 when President Obama was on the ballot. I was a freshman in college. People tell me, the political professionals that are older than me, tell me that there used to be a time where we really just debated issues. At this point, though, we are having far too many political conversations that are debating the existence of people. Right, we are debating like the civil rights of individuals, and so when my political professionals are like, we used to just debate issues, I'm like, didn't the civil rights movement happen? But maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. So I think part of the alignment of people's personal politics, or if they're being forced into a camp, understanding they don't necessarily agree with everything the camp says, but they're being forced into a camp. Part of a key tenet of our politics nowadays is debating the existence of people. And so if I am someone of which one of the factions that subscribes to your apparatus says should not exist, right? If the QAnon people and the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis are no longer apparatus adjacent movements, I don't know. I think that there's a growing faction, though, of people in America, especially younger people of color, who identify as independents, who are rebuffing the big D and the big R, and who are like, we are independents. My sister is one of them. She's not a registered Democrat. She's been a registered independent since she could vote. And she's like, I don't want to be a Democrat or a Republican. I said, that's fine. But you do need to participate in the political process. Mm-hmm. And then I think that that notion of I don't want to be in a camp because this camp really doesn't represent me, right, bumps up against the fact of the way in which our system is structured.
We can take about 3 more questions in.
Hi, I'm Mercy. I'm the Executive Secretary of DC College Democrats here in DC, and I'm a political science and international student, and I'm graduating this December.
All right.
Yay! So one question that I have, so when you transition through the different jobs in your career, so how did you navigate the different mentorship, like when you were working for Vice President Harris or for Senator
Sanders? No relation.
And also, I think you worked like in the law firm as well, and also in the transportation policy center. Did you find a mentor each job that you had, or was a mentor outside of the different jobs? Because we're all about to graduate, and for many people, they tell you when you go through your career change, it's very important to find a mentor. But also, how do you find a mentor
Yeah, you're just not walking up to people being like, will you be my mentor? So sometimes I had like a person whom I worked with who became my like mentor, if you will. It's the person that I sought counsel from. And the way I like to do it is I like to go to the people that are doing what I do or are doing what I would like to do. And I seek their counsel. I've never gone to someone and asked them like, will you be my mentor or will you help me? But it's like I come with a question. And then I keep coming back with questions. But then I'm an executor and I'm executing what you're telling me, so you're willing to keep answering my questions. And I think that people appreciate when new people, younger people, seek their counsel. Because in many of the jobs that I've had, I hadn't done it before. And so I sought the counsel of people who had and let them know that the door was open. I'm here for feedback, but I'm also here for you to tell me how you did it, because I'm doing it for the first time. So I would like I want to be grounded in something. So a lot of times it was people outside, but when I worked for the vice president, she was my mentor. And she still is. And I think that there's a lot of things that's written about her, and the way people talk about her in the media and in people's various circles. But I will just say this. I had never worked in an environment where the person that was in charge looked like me. And I watched her every day go into the White House, sit in meetings with the president, redirect the conversation that centered people that look like us. And that I watched her promote and hire and intentionally put people in the room. There had never been a black woman who had been a spokesperson for the Vice President of the United States before. I was the first. And I wasn't just a spokesperson, I was a senior advisor and chief spokesperson, and I was a deputy assistant to the President of the United States of America. There were a friend of mine who is now the executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus, Vincent and I, we both worked on the campaign together, and then we came into the vice president's office together. And I remember his first day at work, some of us started earlier, and then some people had to come a little later because of COVID. Vincent's first day at work was maybe a month after we had already been there. And I remember taking him around like the White House, because I had a blue badge, so I could walk anywhere. And I remember taking him around the White House into the residence area, and he's like, I never would have thought a little poor country boy will be up in here. And Vincent has a thick accent, a long beard. And he said, and when we went into the vice president's office that day, he told her that. And she was like, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. And so I watched the most powerful woman in the world be questioned about her intelligence daily. Okay, let's just be clear. That's what they write in the papers. Be questioned about her intelligence, her ability, her credentials. And that was the most powerful example for me. And she was somebody that I could ask questions to. And when I told her I was ready to go, she sat me down in her office and had a very frank and clear conversation with me that I appreciated. And so I think that, like, I never asked her to be my mentor, and I was good at my job. Because if I was bad at my job, she probably wouldn't want to tell me nothing. Okay? I wouldn't have had the opportunity to go sit in the office, you know, so there's that. And so I do think that there's a piece about being good at what it is that you do. How many times has someone asked y'all what you want for dinner and you say, I don't know? If I ask you right now, what do you want for dinner?
Steak.
Oh, okay. That's a lady that knows. Now y'all know because I told you. Okay, but it happens to all of us. What do you want for dinner? Oh, I don't know. Whatever you want. Da 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 da. No, when you know you really want steak. Or you want that restaurant y'all went to 2 days last week, but you don't want to say it because you don't want them to say no. Or you ain't hungry. You eat. I ain't trying to eat with you. Whatever the answer is, we know what it is that we want, but we oftentimes don't say what it is. And I think that, one, we need to be willing to ask for the things that we know we have worked for, ask for the things that we want, and let the people tell us no. And two, when you get the things that you want, be ready to execute. And I have found that people are willing to mentor you when you show the effort, when you have done the work, when you do your research, and when you can execute. And a lot of young people nowadays, we are asking for the things that we think we work for, and then people can't execute. And it's like, oh, Lord, we done all fought for baby to get this job, and she don't know nothing. She ain't read nothing before she came up in here. She ain't do not even a Google search to pretend she been here before. And that's just not enough. Like, we got to do our part. And I think but you know, there's some people in my career that have not been supportive of me, who I've, you know, done well in spite of. And that's all right too.
All right, 2 last questions.
There have been many cases where it is the women that look like me who have participated in the chit chat to undercut, defame, and or tear down. And I think that is one of the things that has been the most difficult thing for me to experience. But it's also been women and women that look like me who have promoted me, who have said my names in rooms that I haven't been in, but white men too. The reason I have a television career, it goes all the way back to a white man named Tad Devine. Tad was a media consultant for Bernie Sanders and a pollster, and he was his ad buyer. And when I got on the campaign, one of the things Senator Sanders and I had said is that I get to do TV. And then I never got to do TV mysteriously. I just never got booked. So when I asked, I was told, oh, I wasn't ready. I got all these excuses. And I went to Tad and I said, I want you to train me on media. And he was like, oh, you don't need training, kid. You're great. I said, yes, but if you say I'm good, Senator Sanders and all these other people will listen to you. So I need you to train me and tell them that I'm good. And he did. And I sat with Tad and his team people for like 3 days. He gave me media training. I came to DC. We did it. And it was after that, we were in a meeting and I was like, you gonna tell Bernie? I'm like, Tad. And sure enough, Tad spoke up in my stead. And that is how I started doing television. Without Tad Devine, wouldn't have gotten my opportunity. So I think that there is your mentors and your sponsors, right? The people that will speak your name when you are not in the room, they come in all different packages. Yes. And it is very important. That's why it goes back to like being good at what you do. Because you might not like me. There are many people that might say I'm a little too much for them. But guess what, honey? There's no one that's going to outwork me. There are very few people that can do what I do as well as I do it. And they all know that. That's why they still call. Now I just don't answer. I have a show.
Hello, good evening. My name is Symone. I'm a senior at Trinity, Washington University. My degree is in public health services, and my major is in political science or international relations. My end goal is to be a diplomat, especially for my country, Sierra Leone. I like to help the citizens, the women, and children over there. And I have done my research, a lot of research, and I brought my resume. My question to you is, how can I be a good representative?
Well, no one has ever brought their resume and asked a question, honey. You know, I don't know if I have any diplomatic openings on my team, but I can say that I will give you my contact information, and I am more than happy to have a conversation with you. And if there's somebody I can introduce you to, I would love to do that. I'm always happy to. When people ask me, no one's ever asked me that like in a thing. They put you on the spot. They don't let you get away. You know how sometimes somebody come up to you and you're like, I don't know if they know what they're talking about. So you just bob and weave, but they get you on the record up in the top. So it's a tactic I'm gonna tell people to start using now. That's a good one. That's a you better trailblaze. Okay. I'm always happy to do that because I know that like the circles. I would have never imagined I worked at the White House. It was not in the cards for me, honey. I just don't even know how I was going to get there. I did not know, I didn't know any senators. I didn't know the Congress people I knew were just the people that used to, my one congressman in District 2 in Omaha, Nebraska. And he was always a Republican up until one time. So the way people get these jobs and the way people get into the rooms is in fact their circles and the connections. And oftentimes people ask, well, why are there not more women or why are there not more people of color? Because they literally didn't know any women. And they didn't try to know any women. They literally do not personally know any people of color in their circles, and they did not try to expand their circle. So it is, I think, just very important for me, and I think it should be something we all think about, is how can we help the space and places that we are in expand the circles and the people that they think they know.
Let us give Simone. All right. sharing with us, taking time out of your busy schedule to come here. I know we all really enjoyed your message, and thank you again. And look forward to having you back.
Thank you. I look forward to being back. Can I leave you all with one other thing? Because you mentioned mental health, and I usually always say this, and we didn't. We had such a, you had me going deep today. I was like, oh, I had to pull out the apparatuses. You know, I like it. I think the mental health piece is so important. And a couple in 2017, my father had a stroke, and then 2 weeks later, he was dead. He had a stroke. He was at the gym. He got off the treadmill. He went to the front, told the woman he didn't feel well. He thought she'd call 911, then he collapsed. 2 weeks later, he was gone. And a week after that, 4 days after that, my father we had a memorial service for him, and then I went right back to work. There are very few people that knew my father died. Like, I was back at work, I was back on TV, like I was traveling, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was very depressed. I didn't want to be by myself. I didn't want to be at home. I took every opportunity to be out and be gone. And I was in the airport one day, late per usual. If you know me, I'm always late. Honey, I'm triple booked. And I was late today. That's why I'm staying late. And I missed a flight, late. And I'm sitting there, and someone whom I know, a friend of mine, but like I don't know her really well. We don't talk regularly. But like if I see you, it's all good. She calls, and I was like, hey, girl, what's up? She's like, girl, I heard your daddy died. Are you okay? And I just broke down, started sobbing in the airport. The lady next to me moved her stuff over 3 seats. I'm like, you know, I needed a friend. And my friend is like, you have to stop. You need to talk to someone. You cannot keep going like this. A week later, a mentor of mine asked me to go to dinner. I'm thinking she's trying to, you know, give me a contract. And she told me that she had a number of grief counselors she wanted to give to me because she lost her father around the same age that I lost mine, and she was concerned about me. And it was my friend who called me in the airport and that mentor that did not know, but they saved my life. And I started going to therapy, and it is when I realized I was depressed. And I walked around the entirety of the United States of America for a whole year, hopping on and off planes, getting on TV, depressed, and did not know it. And there are so many people, and interacting with people who didn't know what I was going through. And I just think every day we interact with people and we have no idea the burdens that they are carrying. There's somebody in this room who has lost someone recently, someone who has had a death in their family, someone whom has lost their job, or their parent has lost their job, someone whose family member is struggling with a health issue, struggling financially. There's someone whose family, close friend lives in fear of being swept up by ice in the street. Like, let's just be very clear. There are people, you don't know what people are walking around carrying. And that friend picking up the phone and asking me, am I okay? I heard you. That mentor taking me to dinner and truly asking me, am I okay? And waiting to hear the answer. It saved my life. And I think we need to do a little bit better about when we ask people, how are you doing? How are you okay? Waiting to hear the answer. So here we go.